welcome to this tutorial about Spring Boot. And in continuation of previous video in which we talked about auto configuration in Spring, today we will be doing looking into configuration of an application in Spring Boot, and we will also do one hands-on demo of this, and I'll show you how easy it is to configure an application. So let's get started and see what is and how we can configure any application. So the part of power of Spring Boot comes from the various ways that you can change the configuration of an application either during runtime or during startup time. So there are various ways to do the configuration. Most popular is property based configuration. So it is one of the common ways to certainly change an application uh, by using properties. And this is indeed one of the most common ways which is used throughout the life cycle of a Spring application. So the application.properties or application.yaml file provide very basic configuration changes. And in my opinion, these two locations are good really only for development and demo purposes, because in reality the types of configuration that you are going to put into a Spring applications are going to have so much variance based on the data center or the environment that you are running in. And while the YAML file gives you a little bit more control, both of them are really deployment like development focused in my opinion. Next, there is environment variable based configuration, and they are also very common, and especially for modifying the profiles that will be loaded. And we are going to get into those profiles in our next tutorial video. But this is a way to modify the runtime environment to give you very specific configuration properties for the environment itself. Similar to environment variables, you can also inject at the command line different properties into your Spring applications. Now, while this is less common than a runtime environment variable, they do offer some value when you may have to have two or three applications running in same environment but serving different functions. The most common way to modify properties of a Spring Boot application is through cloud configurations. Though the use of things like config server, vault, or console, you can change the configuration for an entire cloud native based application suite instead of just a single application. And that's really where the power of cloud configuration comes from. Another way to modify the configuration of a Spring application is through the beans that are actually defined as a part of our application context. Now, much like properties, there are several ways to add beans to a Spring or Spring Boot application. Adding beans to the default application class is very much a demo process. I wouldn't really use this in real world examples because anonymous classes tend to get really dirty and really hard to debug. But it definitely is an option to add beans to the application class. Now you can add beans to separate configuration class, and there are a couple different ways to get those loaded into the application context. And you can rely on a component scanning, or you can define those configuration classes as something to import. You can also use XML based configuration files. Now if you are using XML based configuration files for legacy application usage, it's great, continue doing that, because there's not really much of a need to rewrite all those if those applications are legacy. If, however, you find yourself writing new XML files to get configurations into your Spring applications, I would stop what you are doing, rethink your decision, and take a deeper look into Java based configurations. That will help you much better rather than doing XML based configurations. Then there is something called component based configurations, and that indeed is the next way that you can get beans into your application. And by default, any component or a stereotype of component is found in a sub package of the package containing the default application class for the Spring Boot application. That will be component scanned unless you tell it not to. Now, of course, you can do mixture of any or all of this as you want, and that's what Spring allows you to do. Take and mix and match whatever you need to make your application run. So now let's return to the application that we created a couple videos ago, and let's make some modification to the configuration itself. So now I'm in Eclipse, and I have opened up the project which we created in chapter 1, that initial demo app. And in that chapter, if you remember, we created one index.html, and then we started our Spring Boot application, and Spring Boot started serving that page on 8080 port. So just let's see that behavior once, and then we will make some property changes, and we will create a simple REST API. We will create an API, and then we'll see how it behaves with the Spring property change. So now Spring Boot application has started up, and it is running on 8080 port, which is the default behavior of the inbuilt Tomcat server, which is part of Spring Boot application. So once it started, so if we go to localhost 8080, we can see our page which we created, that hello world page on the index file, is being served there. So this index.html is getting served there. So now let's make some property changes, and let's see how the behavior works. So in Spring Boot application, there is a application.property files which gets scanned at startup boot time, and from there this properties are read, and we can override those. So as we discussed in our theory part, so let's write server dot port, and let's give it a new port. We'll give it 8081, and then let's create one API here. In real world, you will not be creating anything inside this Spring Boot application file. You will create separate controllers and services. Just for the sake of the demo, I'm writing here. So I will highly recommend not to do this in real world. So I'm going to create a REST controller. So REST controller, and then I'm going to give it a mapping, a request mapping. And let's call it API. So this is our API, and then in here we are going to create a class, that is our public class API controller. And then let's go inside and create a method, and that method will be public string, and we will call it get or let's call it say hello. So this will not take any argument, and what it will do, it will return and say hello to us. So it will say hello learners, welcome to Spring Boot. And to make it work, we have to annotate this also. It is giving okay, not rerun, it's return, RETURN, spelling mistake. Okay, so we have to annotate this method also with a get mapping, and we'll call that mapping as let's call it API say hello. Very innovative, I know, very creative also. So now I'm going to start this, and our API as well as our page will be served on this port rather than 8080, which is the default behavior. So let's start it. So now Spring is getting boot up, and we will see that Tomcat is getting started, has changed its port. So now Tomcat got started at 8081, and if I go back to this page and if I enter again, so nothing is coming. And if I do 8081, our hello world is being served, and also our API which we built is also getting served at 8081. So it's saying hello learners. And so here, this was just a very simple demo to show that with the help of property files we are able to configure Spring Boot application. And similarly there are various ways that we talked of doing configuration, and we will see all of them in future videos. And keep watching, and keep liking the videos, and do subscribe if you have not yet. Thank you. Bye bye.